Sudden heartbeat. The third time I met Eden, it was the first time I felt the urge to seduce someone in the dark private room. I was nudged by someone. My thigh slipped, and I ended up draped over him. Eden's body went stiff, his face cold. Are you doing calisthenics? I was flustered and trembling, and instead of saying, I want to borrow your leg, I accidentally said, I want to squeeze your leg. Eden's face darkened instantly, and it picked me up with a grimace. That night, Hattie's prospective boyfriend, Orville, hosted a singles party in the smoky private room. I saw him for the third time. The man was lounging on the sofa, distantly playing with a goblet in his hand. His rose-colored lips were stained with red wine, making them appear even more delicate and alluring. In that instant, I was enchanted. I felt the first stirrings of wanting to seduce someone. I nudged a nearby friend. Who is he? Hattie looked back at me. Oh, he's Eden, the heir of the Hua family from the capital, she teased. So, do you like him? Overheated. I nodded and whispered my little secret in her ear. This vixen excitedly shared all her lifetime's tricks with me. They were all twisted and perverted. It was quite vulgar. In the middle of it, I went to the restroom. When I returned, I didn't expect Hattie to hide by the door and push me from behind. I ended up falling onto Eden. Fortunately, I landed partly on an empty seat, but my thigh slipped off. My body hung awkwardly on his leg, resembling a stretching exercise. I was petrified, my mind blank. My gaze involuntarily fell on his long, relaxed legs. Long, firm, wrapped in fabric with an exquisite touch. It looked so good. I was burning with embarrassment, trying to stand up, but my legs were too weak, and I fell back down. Eden's body stiffened, and he looked at me coldly, his voice stern. Are you doing calisthenics? I was so embarrassed that my mind went blank, and I couldn't move. He waited for a while, his brows furrowing tighter, and he spoke with great patience. Aren't you moving? I turned pale, thinking I had embarrassed myself terribly, so I decided to make a scene. I opened my mouth but trembled. I want to squeeze your leg. Damn, I meant to say, I want to borrow your leg. Immediately, the room was filled with teasing laughter. Eden raised an eyebrow, his dark, narrow eyes showing extreme restraint, his lips pressed tightly, his features sharp and defined. He stared at me and said softly, What did you say? I misspoke. I was flustered, quickly explaining, I want to do some exercise with you. Damn it, that cursed mouth. I meant to say, I want to do some exercise. Why did I add those two extra words? The room erupted in laughter. Eden's face instantly darkened, his brows furrowing deeply. It was probably the first time he had been continuously teased like this. He glanced at my awkward position, hanging on his leg, could no longer tolerate it, and roughly lifted me off and placed me on the sofa before walking away. Meanwhile, Hattie gave me a thumbs up, looking at me with admiration. Sister, you really made an impression. I wished I could disappear on the spot. I thought Eden had left for good, but to my surprise, he came back later. After several rounds of drinks, Hattie encouraged everyone to play truth or dare. The game rules were simple. The person who drew the card could command others to either tell a truth or face a dare. This little devil was good. She drew herself in the first round. She raised her eyebrows at me, making my heart tighten. When she suggested, the most handsome and the most beautiful person kiss, I felt relieved and confirmed it. The most handsome was Orville, who had ambiguous relations with her, and the most beautiful, in her narcissistic nature, was none other than herself. I smirked, admiring her courage. This woman truly never missed an opportunity to benefit herself. However, to my shock, I heard the whole room chanting, Anna, Eden, Anna, Eden. My heart almost stopped. I looked back at Hattie, who had a gleeful expression. I nervously signaled her to stop. I had already taken a risky move, but Hattie maliciously smiled, mouthing, as expected. I quickly turned to look at Ian. The man remained calm, unmoving. Since he didn't move, I didn't either. Seeing this, Hattie added another rule. If you refuse, you must do the opposite task. I was so excited, I almost jumped up. That meant the most handsome divided by beautiful person had to kiss the ugliest one. It was simply horrifying. I pinched my thigh, deciding to go for it. I couldn't control how Eden felt. If he didn't comply, no one could force him, but they wouldn't let me off. I couldn't kiss the ugliest one. I stood up, prepared to kiss Eden unexpectedly. Wait, Hattie suddenly shouted. I had to brake suddenly. My nose collided directly with his nose. A sharp stinging sensation spread in my nostrils. The heat from his breath sprayed on my face. Looking at his almost perfect face, deep-set eyes, and high bridge of his nose, like a finely carved art piece, my heart raced uncontrollably. So close, just a bit more. I almost kissed him. Shenjia excitedly shouted to everyone. what's the pose? Someone next to her immediately answered, leg squeeze kiss. Yes, yes, yes. The whole room erupted in chaos. Leg squeeze kiss. Leg squeeze kiss. I was engulfed in a wave of heat. I couldn't help but curse. Is this joke never going to end? In the midst of the commotion, Eden had already pushed my hands away and coldly cast me aside. His fierce gaze made me shiver. I glanced around at the crowd. The ugliest one resigned to my fate. I begged Eden quietly, help me. Just this once. He remained silent. His gaze towards me was filled with unfamiliar emotions. His face hard as stone, his perfect jawline connected to his long neck. Like a proud swan, I felt a chill in my heart. Kissing Eden was a death wish. Kissing the ugliest was disgusting. Forget it. I ultimately convinced myself disgust is temporary, but survival is paramount. Steeling myself, I walked towards the ugliest in the crowd. Before closing my eyes, I saw his extremely lewd smile. My heart churned. A sharp pain shot through my wrist. This damn guy was so impatient. I crashed into him, enveloped in a strong male pheromone. A suffocating sensation. Resigned, I lifted my leg and straddled the man. I roughly pressed his head down and kissed him. For a moment, it seemed like the surrounding sounds faded away. Although he looked quite unsavory, I had to admit that his lips were incredibly soft and sweet, like a plump and juicy orange. The scent in his mouth was also pleasant, like fresh lotus after the rain. His hands were clasped around my waist, maintaining just the right amount of distance. He was quite the gentleman. I thought to myself that perhaps one shouldn't judge a person by their appearance. A slight sense of affection began to rise. I cautiously opened one eye, only to be startled and jump up. It turned out to be Eden. Could it be that I had walked the wrong way? That couldn't be right. Or perhaps Eden had pulled me in himself. No way. In a flurry of confusion, I buried my head down like a hangman, my trembling hand clutching the edge of my dress as if holding on to my very life. The surroundings were silent and still. After a while, Eden stood up expressionlessly, straightened his wrinkled clothes, and casually said, let's go. A group of people stood up as well and called out to me, sister-in-law, let's go. I nearly stumbled and almost fell to the ground. Hattie grabbed me and asked ambiguously in my ear, how was the taste? I wanted to cry but had no tears. Sister, I almost got played to death. Hattie put her arm around my waist. I see you had a great time. That's Ethan. After all, maybe it was his first kiss. I twitched my mouth and looked at her with disdain. I don't know if it was his first kiss, but it was definitely my first kiss. Hattie screamed in disbelief. No way. Sam has never kissed you before. For Hattie put a lot of effort into setting me up with Eden. For me, she first secured a relationship with Orville and then forced him to extract Ethan's whereabouts. Meanwhile, I was racking my brains for a perfect encounter for us. On Friday afternoon, I was supposed to go for a character interview. However, just before leaving, I received a message from Hattie. I changed my plans at the last minute and went to the lecture at Yinshan University. Previously, due to my position with the Provincial Writers Association and the fame from a few best-selling novels, the school had invited me to give a lecture, which I had declined several times. Knowing that I was coming, the school had made extensive announcements. When I arrived at the lecture hall, it was packed to capacity with no empty seats. Since this was a last-minute decision, I had no prepared speech. The entire lecture was improvised, but it was filled with laughter and applause. The lecture ended after 2 hours. I thought I could finally find Eden. I heard today was the topping out ceremony for the building he donated to the school. When I came down from the stage, however, I was surrounded by enthusiastic students eager for autographs. My hand was almost worn out from signing, but the crowd showed no signs of thinning. The teachers maintaining order were also very troubled. At this moment, a man in a black suit squeezed next to the teacher beside me and whispered something. The teacher then took the microphone and signaled for everyone to be quiet. He said, in 20 minutes, the Hua Group will hold a lottery ceremony. 100 winners will be given a chance to visit the Gator Factory and will also receive a signed copy of Anna's essays. The crowd erupted in excitement. The Hua Group, a Fortune 500 company, with its grand buildings and high salaries, is a dream for many. The Gator Factory, with its cutting-edge automation technology, is a legend in the field. In just 5 minutes, I witnessed the scene go from bustling to deserted. By the time I got there, Eden was already nowhere to be seen on stage or in the crowd. He must have left. I felt extremely disappointed, said goodbye to the school leaders, and walked towards the school gate. From a distance, I saw a handsome figure surrounded by people. Who else could it be but Eden? I rushed to the gate, but he had already finished shaking hands with people and got into a luxury car parked by the roadside. The car drove off, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't even get a chance to see him. Feeling extremely dejected, I took out my phone and sent a message to Eden. Mr. Hua, what a coincidence. Or rather, what an unlucky encounter. To my surprise, he replied immediately with a new message. At the intersection ahead, turn left. I was overjoyed. After walking a short distance, I saw his car. The driver was behind the wheel, and Ethan was in the back seat, looking down at his phone. When he saw me coming, he nodded and signaled me to open the car door. I bent down and Saturday beside him, introducing myself to the front landing era. Thank you. The car started, and we drove in silence. It wasn't until we reached the entrance of the community that he put away his phone. I looked at him with a sincere smile. Thank you for today. He raised his chin with interest and asked, thank me for what? For bringing me back. And for the school matter. He nodded, leaned back with a lazy expression. It's mutual. After Ali borrowed Miss Chi's fame, I smiled and took the opportunity. In that case, we must have a drink together. He seemed in a good mood, chuckling lightly, and casually asked, is drinking your hobby? My ears tingled instantly, and I stared at him with not really. He looked up in confusion. I got out of the car, looked at him, and deliberately prolonged my tone. I reached through the window, grabbed his hand, and with a fluttering heart, wrote you on his palm. Then I turned with a radiant smile and walked away. After that, we didn't see each other for about a week. A novel I was serializing online, Lost Face, was nearing its end. Pressured by fans' frantic demands for updates, I stayed up for several days and nights, finally finishing it. The ending was a tragic one. I got too immersed in the story, identifying with the heroine's miserable life, and was emotionally stuck, feeling depressed and downhearted. Seeing me like this, Hattie insisted that I attend her boyfriend's birthday party. Despite her mixed tactics, I hurriedly tidied myself up and went out. At the party, I expected to see Eden, but he didn't show up, so I hid alone in a corner and drank some quietly. On the way back, I was robbed. I was knocked to the ground, my right hand scraped, and my bag was stolen. Fortunately, I had my phone in my hand. My hand stung, and bright red blood was oozing out. My head was spinning, and I Saturday on the ground despondently until a man helped me up. When I looked up to thank him, I was shocked to see it was Sam, my ex-boyfriend. We had been broken up for over a year, thoroughly separated, and I never expected to see him again. Perhaps due to the effects of alcohol, I ended up crying like a child in front of him. Sam comforted me for a long time, and after calming me down, he took me home. We talked on the bench downstairs for a while. What we talked about, I don't remember clearly. After sobering up, when we parted ways, I insisted on watching him leave first. I took the elevator upstairs. The long, empty corridor, with its flickering sensor lights, cast my thin shadow. My emotions, crushed by the novel's tragic life, were unbearable. The loneliness and sadness inside me came crashing down. I was startled when my hand was suddenly grabbed. Looking down, I recognized the person from the shadow beside me. His breath was cold, and a strong smell of smoke lingered around him. His presence seemed to provide me with an outlet for my pent-up emotions. I grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the apartment. I hooked his neck and kissed him. He was stiff and remained still for a moment before pushing me away. Slap! A blinding white light turned on. The light revealed his tall, slender figure blocking the glare. His broad shoulders and the interplay of black and white light made his face look even more solemn and noble. His thin lips were pressed tight, and he slowly raised his hand, holding what seemed to be the bag that was just stolen from me. My heart sank even more, feeling utterly disinterested. My head was spinning, and I had no desire to think about how the bag ended up with him. I only felt that my tiny, pathetic fantasy was ruthlessly crushed when he reached out. I had thought he might have some feelings for me, that he might have, but it turned out to be my own delusion. I couldn't help but sneer. It's just a worthless bag. Mr. Hua didn't need to personally return it. I reached out and took the bag, casually tossing it to one side. Then I turned and walked away, no longer looking at him. It's getting late. I won't ask you in for water. The air grew still in an instant. Eden took off his shoes and stormed in, grabbing my arm with force and positioning me properly. His eyes seemed to blaze with anger as he fixed his gaze on me. The grip on my hand was painfully tight, and I inhaled sharply. He sneered, his voice dark and grunting. Anna, is your ingratitude engraved into your bones? What do you mean? I felt a sudden pang of guilt, though I couldn't quite place why. Suppressing my unease, I looked up at him directly. To accuse me of ingratitude, considering we've only met 4 times, seems excessive, doesn't it? It seemed he saw through my thoughts. His gaze flickered, his expression hardened, appearing even angrier than before as he gritted his teeth and said, "Consider it my mistake for having feelings." With that, he wrenched his hand away from mine and turned to leave. I panicked inexplicably. I rushed up and clung to his waist, fueled by the alcohol. I was reckless and shameless. "Ethan, I won't let you go." "Let go." Ethan's tone was icy, like his fingertips as he pried my fingers open one by one. "I won't let go." Not letting go. My face was pressed against his back, like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. Eventually, he managed to free my hands, but it looked momentarily stunned, his body tense, his expression one of surprise as he turned around. "Why are you crying? What are you crying for?" He frowned, staring at my face. I touched my face in confusion and found my palm was wet. Why am I crying? Honestly, I didn't know. Maybe it was the melancholy of my writing, the torment of life, or perhaps it was seeing Sam again after all this time. My voice was so hoarse I could barely speak. I took a deep breath. My face flushed as I made up a lie. "I'm starving." Eden looked surprised again, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Only in the morning." "I really owe you," he sighed, lifting his hand to gently wipe away my tears. His tone softened as he said, "All right, I'll go buy something." He then guided me to the sofa and turned to leave. I grabbed his hand, looking up at him and unconsciously softening my voice. "Will you really come back?" Eden nodded, his expression full of resignation. "I will." Satisfied, I let go of his hand and watched him leave. Taking advantage of the moment, I went to the bathroom to freshen up. When I returned to the sofa, I hadn't been seated long before the doorbell rang. At that moment, a slight sweetness filled my heart. "Why are you back so soon?" However, my voice trailed off, and I frowned. Standing outside the door was Sam. "I remember your hand wasn't treated properly and might get infected, so I went to the pharmacy to get you some alcohol and bandages." He said this while taking off his shoes and pulling me to the sofa to tend to my injury. He placed my hand on his knee, opened the bottle of alcohol, and examined my hand closely. The cut had scabbed over, the blood and dirt indistinguishable and grim. "We might need to reopen it. If the dirt isn't cleaned, the risk of infection is very high." He glanced at me before focusing back on my hand. "Bear with it." He then reached for a cotton swab to probe the wound. My nerves were on edge. I'm not someone who juggles two relationships. I don't play coy, and don't want Eaton to catch on and misunderstand. "I can clean it myself." "It's too late. You should go back." I quickly withdrew my hand and stood up. Sam's face grew stern as he said, "How will you clean it yourself? Don't fuss. Just sit down." He tried to pull me back. A bad feeling flashed through me. I glanced at the clock, trembling, and pushed him away. "Sam, I'm dizzy from drinking. Please, go." He looked at me with a serious expression, his gaze turning colder and more mocking. "Is someone coming?" My silence seemed to confirm his suspicion. Sam nodded, a self-deprecating smile on his lips. "All right, I'll leave." He turned and closed the door with a clean, decisive motion. I breathed a sigh of relief, then felt the alcohol hit me as my head spun. I returned to the sofa, staring at the door, hoping Eden would come back soon, and then heard the doorbell again. This time, it was truly Eden returning. There wasn't much food left. The only place nearby is Lawson's. He opened a bag and laid out some pre-prepared food on the table. The smell of the food quickly filled the room. I sat at the table and pretended to be interested, picking a skewer of Odin to eat, but I had no appetite. I wasn't really hungry. "Don't like it." Eden sat down opposite me. "Not at all." I blinked my large, watery eyes. He raised an eyebrow slightly and said, Duh, then eat some more." "Okay." I deliberately made my voice sweet and compliant, taking another item from the bag. After I finished eating, he said, "Give me your hand." Without waiting for my response, he grabbed my hand and furrowed his brows deeply. He suddenly stood up and walked to the coffee table in front of the sofa, fussing with something, and returned with a white plastic bag. It was marked Minsham Pharmacy. I suddenly realized this was the same bag Sam had brought earlier. I looked at him with some nervousness. Eden pulled out the gauze and alcohol and asked casually, "Did you buy this?" "Yes." I felt guilty. I bought it on the way back. I'm not someone who lies often, but with Eden, it's different. I'm afraid he might overthink things. He glanced at me briefly without saying anything further. After treating my wound, he said in a flat tone, "I ran into someone in the elevator earlier." I felt a jolt in my heart. My face paled slightly as I stared at him, waiting for his next word. He leaned back, resting against the chair, and threw a crumpled note onto the table in front of me. With trembling fingers, I opened the note. It was a receipt from Minsheng Pharmacy, dated 20 minutes ago. Eden's face was cold as he stood up, his voice low and heavy. Anna, if you're not sure, don't come and provoke me. I'm not someone you can toy with. That night, I couldn't remember how Ian left. On the lonely pillow, I was exhausted and curled up. The night was cool, and the moonlight outside bathed me like a thin blanket, enveloping me. Yet, no matter how closely it clung to my body, it couldn't warm me. In the middle of the night, I was ensnared by a lone, haunting dream. Time seemed to freeze back in high school. That day, I was wearing a white dress, searching for my bicycle in a large parking lot, when I encountered a few thugs. In the dim light, they smoked and grinned, surrounding me. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and I found myself in a strange, empty alley. When I saw the street sign saying Nanchuan Road, I was startled. This was a street next to the school. I had heard of it but had never been there. For no other reason, this was a street notorious in school fightings, brawls, and all sorts of trouble. It was also a major headache for the school officials and the local police. A stiff pain shot through my wrist. The thugs surrounded me, dragging me forcefully to the center of the conflict. Beat him to death. Give him a good thrashing. Shouting echoed around me. I was bewildered and confused. It turned out they were fighting in groups. There were dozens of people on site, divided into two opposing sides. The leader on the left was my self-appointed big brother. The leader on the right was a class bully who bothered me all the time. They were fighting this pointless battle for me. I was forced to be a bystander. The scene was intense, with no one caring about my safety. Certainly, here is the translation of your text into English. I got caught up and almost got hurt. During the escape, I ran into the second rescue team led by my brother. This group of ruffians, I really don't know what they wanted. They grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back. At the critical moment, a young man appeared against the light. I heard them whispering in fear, muttering his name, but I didn't catch it clearly. The young man had a deep and magnetic voice. He said, "Get lost." They hesitated for a few seconds and then left. Only when he was far away did I dare to turn around. I wanted to see who it was, but all I glimpsed was a thin figure leaving surrounded by a group of people. That figure stood straight like a pine tree and was as white as snow, like the most sacred being in the world. I felt a faint tremor in my heart. I kept replaying the name in my mind. It seemed to be two characters, with an N ending. Familiar but were not. In the end, I found nothing. Later, the scene switched to a high school alumni gathering in a lavish banquet hall with soft music playing. I had a few drinks and got chatty, striking up a conversation with a random old classmate beside me. To my surprise, he mentioned, "Anna, I remember you. The large-scale group fight on Nanchuan Road was because of you." His expression was cold, but his words made my blood boil. I immediately thought of that young man. The fight was the largest of its kind, unparalleled. At that time, the truth was concealed, and rumors were rampant, with the only thing known being that it was over a woman. But that woman was me. Besides the people involved, only I pressed my pounding heart and forced myself to ask, "Who are you?" "Sam," he replied calmly. I looked at him, his slender, handsome figure under the dim light, adding a touch of warmth. Like a snow-capped mountain suddenly touched by a hint of human warmth. It resembled that thin silhouette. I muttered, "Sam, Sam." It was indeed the end sound. As soon as this thought crossed my mind, my heart almost burst out of my chest. An indescribable emotion overwhelmed me. I looked at him, mustered the courage of my life, and said, "Sam, let's be together." He hesitated for a few seconds and then replied, "Okay." I was overjoyed, grabbed his hand, and ran with all my might. Outside the hotel, on a coastal bend, the sunset spread a glow of colors around us. I felt a happiness I had never experienced before. A tender, amused voice came from behind. "Slow down, don't fall. Look over there," I said while turning to look at him, but my sweet expression frowned. See, the person in front of me was not Sam. Instead, it was a stranger's face. I panicked and asked, "Who are you?" He looked at me with a tired expression and said with a faint smile, "Ethan." Huran, an ending sound. I suddenly woke from the dream, drenched in cold sweat. In the next 2 days, I had a high fever, was confused, and forgot to treat the wound on my hand, which had become infected. I thought about Ian and wondered if he had cooled down. I picked up my phone, deleted and revised my message, and finally sent one line to him, "Help, my hand might be ruined." I waited for a while, but there was no reply. Just as I was about to put down my phone, A new message appeared in the chat box. Go to the hospital yourself. Cold-hearted man. I smiled faintly, didn't reply, muted my phone, and hid it under the pillow, preparing to lie down and get up later. I don't know how long it was before a loud knocking woke me up. After lying down for 2 days, I felt dizzy when I got up. I walked irritably to the door and peered through the people. The person outside was the one I liked. Ethan. I joyfully opened the door, wanting to ask, "Why are you here?" But he immediately said, "Why didn't you answer the phone? I thought you were dead inside." I was speechless, seeing my expression freeze. Perhaps my face was too horrifying. He asked suspiciously, "Are you sick? What about your hand?" He took my hand and saw that the bandage was stained black with pus and had changed color. "How did you get so old?" He frowned deeply. I pretended to be indifferent and said, "It's nothing. I won't die." He gave me a cold look and said, "Put on some clothes and calm down immediately." After saying that, he left without looking back. I held my breath, quickly dressed, and went downstairs. His car was parked outside the door. I opened the door, got into the passenger seat, and said with a hint of sarcasm, "Look, I didn't even have time to put on makeup. With you rushing me like this, anyone would think you want something." He started the engine with a serious face and said, "Do you think you can seduce anyone now?" I almost choked with anger. Due to the severe infection and fever, the doctor originally wanted me to stay in the hospital for an IV drip, but I declined and was only prescribed some medicine. After leaving the hospital, Eden drove me home. Halfway there, I suddenly realized I had nothing at home and thought of a plan. I said, "How about we go to your place?" I deliberately said in a pitiful tone. The doctor said my hand can't get wet. If no one takes care of me, I might end up ruining myself. Eden didn't even look at me and replied coldly, "You look like you're trying to ruin yourself right now." He drove a bit further and then turned around, heading back to his own home. Once inside, his first task was to go to the kitchen. Because I hadn't eaten all day, I found a comfortable spot on the sofa and lay down, listening to the sounds of pots and pans from the kitchen. A warm feeling surged in my heart. Is this what they mean by peace and security in life? To make it easier for me to eat with my left hand, Eden made a few small dishes and some porridge. He placed a bowl of steaming hot food in front of me. That he made me feel emotional, and my eyes even became moist. I ate a few bites, but couldn't help but want to be coquettish with him. I deliberately moved to the stool next to him, poked his arm with my white fingers, and looked at him with interest. "This food is too troublesome to eat. How about you feed me?" Ethan, with an expressionless face, continued eating and said sternly, "If it's troublesome, you don't have to eat it." I stuck out my tongue in boredom, holding the spoon in my left hand and spilling some food from the plate. Seeing this, Ethan put down his chopsticks, grabbed the spoon from my hand, added a bit more food to the bowl, stirred it, and fed me a spoonful. I was flattered and truly felt what it meant to be a pampered, spoiled woman. Swallowing the food, I continued to be coquettish. "Ethan, if you keep this up, I'll really stick with you." Eden glanced at me with dark eyes. "Even feeding you can't shut your mouth." I couldn't help but laugh. After dinner, I lay on the sofa watching TV, while Eden went to the study. He didn't come out even when I turned off the TV and went to bed. My body was sinking into the soft bed, filled with Eden's scent. I felt an unprecedented sense of security, and the tension in my heart was slightly relieved. In the middle of the night, I was extremely thirsty and got up to get some water. Seeing someone lying on the sofa, breathing steadily, it was Eden. I had been sleeping for days, and upon waking, I couldn't fall asleep again. So I decided to squat down and carefully trace his face. Sharp brow bones, narrow eye corners, a straight nose, and exquisite lips. This man's refinement was etched into his bones. Such good bone structure. I couldn't help but marvel. I stood up and was about to return to my room when suddenly, he grabbed my hand. He opened his eyes, pulled me down, and I ended up on top of him. His hot skin burned me. We looked into each other's eyes. His gaze was dark, deep as a pool, shimmering with a hint of light, bottomless. The soft moonlight cast a gentle glow, making his brows and eyes soft and blurry. I was deeply moved, reached out to embrace his neck, and merged our breaths. He let me move but only looked at me, with a hint of exploration in his eyes. There was some restraint, but also anticipation. I lowered my head, took his lips, and with clumsy movements, conveyed my heartfelt emotions. Eden endured for a while, then responded passionately, as if he wanted to merge me into his body. We sank into the sea of passion, and at the crucial moment, he restrained himself and said in a hoarse voice, "It's not the right time yet." I felt agitated and asked, "When will it be the right time?" He didn't answer. Let me know if you need any adjustments or further assistance. Here is the translated text. I ended up naturally being with Ethan on the third day of staying at his place. I couldn't take it any longer and persuaded him to let me go home to get some clothes and daily necessities. He insisted on driving me there. Just as we were approaching the building, I suddenly received a text message from Sam. Are you home? I'm outside your door. Panicking, I grabbed Ethan and said, I don't want to go anymore. It's just some old stuff. Why not let Mr. Hua buy me some new ones instead? Ethan thought I was joking again and stubbornly pulled me, saying, we're already here. Let's go upstairs and check if there's anything useful to bring. It's better than making trips back and forth. Unable to argue with him, I had to think of a way to get rid of him. I said sweetly, I suddenly feel like having a hand-pulled pancake from the alley. Could you go get it for me? Ethan couldn't resist, looking at me with affectionate eyes and said, okay, I'll go get it. As soon as he left, I frantically pressed the elevator button, anxiously rushing to the door, where I saw Sam holding several items. He must have been waiting for a while, as there were several cigarette butts piled up by the door. I asked, confused, Sam, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be at work? I came to see you, he said with a smile. Anna, I've been reassigned back to the city. I was momentarily speechless and managed to ask him, when did this happen? A few days ago. It's quite ironic. On the second day of dating Sam, he was sent to another city for work for a whole year. He woke up earlier than a rooster and went to bed later than a dog, working tirelessly, with barely any time to chat with me. After we broke up, he was reassigned back, and now he seems much freer. I felt a pang of discomfort and said with a sour tone, well, congratulations. Do you need something from me? He came closer, suddenly grabbing my arm, his eyes showing both anxiety and affection. Anna, I want to talk to you about. Anna, a clear, cutting voice suddenly pierced the corridor, interrupting Sam's words. I turned around. At the open elevator door, Eden stood there. His face was stiff and cold, with stormy anger hidden in his dark eyes. Come here. Sam stepped out from behind me, incredulously calling out, Mr. Hua. He looked at Eden, then at me, and hesitantly asked, are you with him now? I responded with a curt yes. He was silent for a moment, then suddenly seemed struck by lightning, sneering coldly, very well, Anna, we're breaking up. You should ask him about it. His index finger brushed past my ear, causing me to shiver. What do you mean? I was bewildered. Anna, Eden spoke again, his tone firmer as he called out, come here. This time, his tone was commanding. He still stood at the elevator door, distant from us. As evening fell, the narrow corridor became somewhat dim, but the window behind him remained brightly lit, with time and space extending infinitely before eventually merging into a single point. And he was the only light in the darkness. Sam said, don't go. But my feet moved toward the light on their own. Eden's tense expression softened slightly. He pulled me into the room, slammed the door shut, and left Sam outside. Eden led me directly to the dining table. The room was dim, but no one bothered to turn on the lights. The game of adults, the unspoken understanding of boundaries, was the unspoken agreement. We exchanged glances for a while. He reached into the bag and took out the wrapped hand-pulled pancake, carefully unwrapping it. The pancake, now wilted and greasy, smelled faintly unpleasant. He held it out to me and asked gently, do you still want the hand-pulled pancake? I looked at him, silent. I thought, he can't possibly not know what I'm thinking. When some things are pointed out, they always need a reasonable response. But evidently, he didn't see it that way. After a while, he put the pancake back into the bag and asked calmly, do you need to pack anything? I'll help you. I remained silent. Huh? Eden looked at me, a cold sneer escaping his nostrils, very light. Gave a self-deprecating smile and said, Anna, what are you being so stubborn about? Stubborn? I was momentarily blinded by frustration. Yes, I'm being stubborn. Then why didn't you tell me? He laughed suddenly, his gaze losing some of its intensity. Tell you what. He waited a moment, then turned to the wine cabinet, took out a bottle of red wine and a goblet, poured a generous amount, and drank it all in one gulp. Sam is the branch manager of Hua's group. A year ago, I sent him to the South City to develop business, and that's all. That's all. I nodded, trying to control myself. So, this long-distance relationship was your idea of a welcome gift? Eden frowned, looking at me intently. Anna, what kind of person do you think I am? His face was icy. You say you like me, but don't even give me a shred of trust. After saying that, He walked out the door without any compassion. Ethan left. I stared at the empty room, unmoving for a long time. Anna, we're breaking up. You should ask him about it. Sam's words echoed in my ears. I thought about the day I broke up with Sam. We had a fight over a small issue. I insisted he apologize to me in person, but he was too busy, so I secretly went to his city. Unfortunately, I caught him in the middle of a social event, drunkenly staggering out with a woman supporting him to a nearby hotel. That night, I Saturday outside the hotel all night. I texted him, let's break up, and then blocked all his contact information. Suddenly, Eden's face appeared in my mind. As a favored son of heaven, Eden had never known hardship, always served by others. But with me, he took care of everything himself, with great care. In just 3 days together, Eden had given me more sweetness than Sam had in a whole year. The more I thought about it, the more upset I felt. A voice inside me kept asking, what am I really being stubborn about? What am I doubting him for? Sam was already a thing of the past. I had no feelings for him anymore. But Ethan was different. He was the present, the future. He was the one meant to stay in my heart. Ethan suddenly disappeared from my life. During this period, I sent him several messages, but it didn't reply. It was likely that I had really hurt him. Staring at the empty conversation box, I felt a deep sadness and anxiety. I told Hattie that I was going on a trip to clear my mind and gather material for my next book. Before I left, she asked to meet me. We went to our usual cafe and had our usual meal. Hattie listened to my story about Eden with sympathy. Men can be quite sensitive. You just need to coax him a bit. I shook my head, laughing silently. Not this time, Hattie encouraged me. Then go out and clear your mind. When you come back, I'll help you fix things with him. I was deeply touched and was about to respond when my phone rang on the table. It was a local unknown number. I hung up without answering, but the call came again. Hesitantly, I answered. A woman's voice was warm. Hello, is this Miss Anna? That extreme courtesy made me stiffen. I replied politely, hello, this is Anna. May I ask who you are? She laughed lightly, her tone becoming even more gentle and friendly. I'm Eden's mother. I'd like to invite you to our home. Is that all right? The car sped on until it stopped at the old Hua residence. I was still in a daze. The solemn and grand entrance. Mrs. Hua had been waiting. When she saw me, she kindly welcomed me. I greeted her politely. Madam, she took my hand and led me inside. Don't stand on ceremony. Come in. We wandered through the winding courtyard, the ancient and elegant scenery dazzling my eyes. I suddenly understood that if it weren't for Eden, I would probably never have the chance to step into such a place in my lifetime. We stopped in front of a house, and Mrs. Hua told me this was where Eden lived as a child. The house was simply furnished, much like his cold personality. She took me to the hall where we had some snacks, then showed me Eden's study. I looked at the shelves full of books. Before I could think, she mysteriously said, there's a secret of Eden's hidden here. A secret? I frowned and looked up in surprise. Madam, ew. Mrs. Hua walked to a row of bookshelves, her fingers gliding over the books one by one. This child, RN, was trained by his grandfather from a young age. Not like a normal child. His excessive calmness and self-respect made him achieve extraordinary things at a young age, but he also lost many things. She turned to look at me and continued, recently, he suddenly seemed like a changed person, sometimes coming back to visit me. But that day, he came back again, looking very unwell, sitting alone on the sofa and smoking for a long time. She stood beside me, quietly watching me. Anna, I've heard your name for a long time. I looked at her in surprise. Mrs. Hua took my arm and, with a smile, asked, do you want to know Ian's secret? She leaned close to my ear and whispered, I'll tell you quietly, it's in his high school books. I didn't know what kind of mood I was in until I saw a notebook named Reflections on Time in his high school series. I hurriedly opened the cover and found that the whole book was filled with records of my youth. On the soccer field, me sweating profusely under the willow tree, me dancing in my skirt in the spring picking flowers, me smiling brightly. Those fleeting moments had been quietly preserved by Eden in his book of memories. Finally, my gaze rested on a class photo from senior year. Among those youthful faces, I spotted the boy behind the girl. So it had been so many years. Tears suddenly filled my eyes. I had never been so eager to see Eden. I ran to ask Mrs. Hua about his whereabouts, but she told me that there was a big problem at Hua's overseas branch, and he had gone abroad half a month ago with no fixed return date. I took out my phone and tried to call him, but no one answered. I didn't give up and sent a series of messages, but there was still no reply. I sat despondently on the sofa, my mind full of Ethan. The more I thought about it, the more afraid I became, afraid that he would never speak to me again, afraid that he would really give up. Mrs. Hua comforted me. Ethan won't let go. You have to trust him. Trust him. Yes. He was angry because I didn't trust him, right? A glimmer of hope arose in my heart, summoning my courage. I sent him a message. Ethan, I trust you, but I waited for a long time, and still, no response came. Uncertainty, disbelief, and mistrust extinguished the little spark of hope in my heart. Leaving the Hua residence, I was filled with sadness. The scenery outside was beautiful, with smoke and willow trees, and evening flowers floating by, but I had no heart to appreciate it. I just walked with my head down. The entire route was deserted, with only a cleaner sweeping fallen flowers by the flower bed, the basket already full. At that moment, a dog suddenly darted out from the flower bed, barking as it ran towards her. Why are you barking? No one says they love you, the cleaner said loudly. The little dog immediately stopped barking and sat her down, but as soon as she moved the basket away, the dog got up, wagging its tail, and followed her again. I was suddenly moved. All things in the world, as insignificant as a little dog, could endure wind, frost, and rain, yet still choose to follow loyally. Yet I, with all my deep feelings for Eden, was ready to give up over a small setback. No, I can't do that. I abruptly stopped and turned back, running towards the Hua residence. By now, night had fully fallen, but my eyes were bright as stars. I stayed at the Hua residence for a few days, but still didn't see Eden return. In the evening, under Mrs. Hua's warm hospitality, I indulged in a feast. My stomach was bloated, and I leaned against the waist in the courtyard to digest. Seeing a lounge chair beside me, and the evening breeze was so pleasant, I decided to lie down. As I was bouncing off, a blinding white light suddenly flashed. I was instantly awake, shielding my eyes with my hand, hearing the roar of a car. Then the car's engine stopped, the lights went out, and I heard someone get out and close the door with a thud. I removed my hand and saw the person, clad in a neat shirt and black pants, tall and upright. The dim light hit the sharpness of his features, making him look surprisingly gentle. I wasn't sure if it was an illusion, rubbed my eyes, and saw him walking towards me. My heart raced. He stopped less than half a meter away from me, looking at me with intense eyes. My blood boiled, and I rushed to hug him around the waist, looking up at him with a trembling voice. Ethan, you're back. He staggered a few steps back from my sudden embrace and frowned slightly, asking, why are you here? I choked up. Aran, you're back. Mrs. Hua's voice came from inside. She came to the door and said, Anna. I invited her over. Ethan looked at me in silence for a moment before saying, come inside. Okay. I released him from my embrace, but tightly held his hand and led him forward. Inside the house, he ate while I watched from the side. He went to the study, and I accompanied him. I didn't let him out of my sight for a moment. Later, when he went to the bedroom, I followed and opened the door. The room was pitch black. He pulled me into his arms, closed the door, and pressed me against the wall. Sure, here's the translation of your text into English. He lowered his head, his pupils dark and heavy, his breath hitting my face. Anna, what do you want to do? I looked up at him, unafraid. I miss you. He gritted his teeth. What about your old flame? Did you come back to me after failing to reconcile with him? I wrapped my arms around his neck. With utmost sincerity, there is no one else in my heart. Only you. He pressed one hand against the back of my head and leaned down to capture my lips. We kissed intensely, entwined, until I was almost out of breath. My face flushed red, and only then did he release me. Anna, I'm going crazy missing you. He breathed hotly into my ear. I felt a surge of grievance. Then why have you replied to my messages? I left in a hurry and forgot that phone, he said apologetically, filled with helplessness. I wasn't sure what you really wanted. The night breeze was even cooler than the evening, and the late wind refreshed the senses. I found a spot at the entrance of Eaton's house, moved a chair, and relaxed against it. Eaton came out from the house and asked, would you like a drink? Feeling great tonight, I replied. Sure. After a while, he came out with 2 bottles of wine, old brew in ceramic jars. He said, a little wine is nice, but don't drink too much or you'll feel uncomfortable at night. He also moved a chair and lay down next to me. We each took a sip of wine. I looked at the stars and thought of the secrets in my notes, then turned to him. Ethan, were we really high school classmates? He hummed softly. Yes. Then why don't I remember you at all? He looked at me, helplessly replying, back then, you were focused on studying. Who would remember anyone else? I was stunned, feeling a pang of sadness. Indeed, I remembered no one. Those 3 years of high school were times of pain that even dreams couldn't escape. Just before school started, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. The only economic pillar of the family was gone, and from then on, my mother and I depended on each other, living in darkness to bear the huge debts, my tuition and living expenses. She worked from dawn to dusk, taking any job she could find, no matter how dirty or tough, as long as it brought in money. Her exhausted appearance felt like a needle in my heart. My only thought at that time was to study hard, stand out, and repay her. Anna, his about high school. I shook my head, suppressing the few memories of sorrow, really too lazy and afraid to think about them. Why don't you tell me? He took a sip of wine, his eyes looking at the night sky. Then, he suddenly chuckled, as if enticed by something. In the second year, there was a time when the math teacher checked homework. You hadn't done it, so you were punished to run 10 laps around the playground. Do you remember? He asked softly. I do. That day, I had a big fight with my mom and went to the internet cafe to sit all night in a fit of anger. I forced a bitter sigh, the only time I didn't do my homework during my school years, and I got caught by the teacher. Can you believe that? That's pretty unlucky, Eden said with a smile, his eyes sparkling. But do you remember how many people didn't do their homework? Too. Seeing him mention this, I asked casually, was the other person you? At that time, I was in such a bad mood that I almost ran out of the classroom. I ran 10 laps around the playground in one go, almost collapsing, and didn't pay attention to who was running behind me. To my surprise, he replied, yes. I widened my eyes in shock. Why didn't you do it either? With his self-discipline and upbringing, it seemed impossible. Eden said lightly, because of you. I was very worried, so I quietly tore up my homework under the desk. My mind went blank instantly, as if something had swept over my heart, followed by a whirlwind of emotions, making it hard to calm down. But Eden continued, every time after school, you always took a detour through the cherry blossom avenue at the west gate, picking a few petals to put in your book. So, I also inexplicably put a lot of specimens in the book. At that time, you were so focused on studying that you didn't know how attractive you were. I saw you receive a lot of love letters every day and was always afraid you'd fall for someone until one day after school, when the classroom was empty, you took out a few love letters from your desk and sighed with a troubled expression. I knew then that you only wanted to study, so I took it upon myself to intercept all your love letters. With each of his words, my eyes grew redder. It turned out that during my most difficult years, there was someone silently watching over me, alleviating my troubles, deeply caring for me. It wasn't solitary. It was full of love. It wasn't darkness. It was radiant. Choking back tears, I suddenly thought of something and asked urgently, Ethan, did you go to that large-scale fight at school? Yes, I asked uncertainly. Did you save me? He gave me a meaningful look. Yes. Didn't you know? When you looked up at me, I thought. No wonder he said I was ungrateful. I hurriedly explained. It was against the light. I couldn't see at all. He suddenly understood. At that time, you were being dragged by several people. I was very angry and told them to get lost, then went to the school authorities to have them expelled. So, that person really was Ethan, not Sam. I remember asking Sam about this after we got together, and he clearly admitted. So, Sam was lying to me? I felt a surge of anger, grabbed the wine jug, and took a few big gulps. The strong alcohol filled my mouth, and my brain quickly became dizzy. Drank slowly. Eden stopped me. I lay back on the chair, the scenery before me swaying, thinking that Eden must have had a hard time these years too. I felt a bit out of breath. Ethan, tell me about these years. He was silent for a while, his voice a bit low. At that time, I was leading the Hua family through a round of reforms. Everything was going according to my plan. I thought you wouldn't be interested in the class reunion, so I didn't pay much attention. I didn't expect you to go and end up with him. Eden sneered. When I found out that the little cabbage I raised with my own hands was taken by another man, do you know how I felt? I even felt like killing him, he said with reddened eyes. Sending Sam to another place was indeed partly my own selfishness, but he was ambitious, using his power for personal gain. Shielding him was also the board's decision. I don't remember when I fell asleep. In my dream, it felt like my head was resting against a warm, soft chest. His presence made me feel extremely secure. The deeper I slept, the more comfortable I felt, though there was always a murmur in my ear. He said, that time you fought, You went to him. I was afraid something would happen to you at night, so I secretly organized that party. I didn't expect the woman would take the opportunity to set him up and make you so upset. Anna, I never intended to break you two up. It made me very sad that you chose him, but I respected your decision. I had never slept so soundly. When I opened my eyes, I quickly looked for the person beside the bed. However, the bed was smooth and cold, without any trace of him. Ethan, I called anxiously, getting out of bed and rushing out through the door. In the hall, I saw Eden lying on a lounge chair. His eyes were closed, his eyelashes fluttering, not sleeping peacefully. I walked over and gave him a gentle nudge, and he woke up. He inhaled, frowning, his voice hoarse. Headache. I asked in concern, why aren't you sleeping in the room? He propped himself up, rubbed his sore shoulders, and softly replied, I was afraid you wouldn't want me there. Tears welled up in my eyes again. I pulled him into the room. Come on, let's sleep inside. He lay down on the bed, staring at me with red and swollen eyes. Ethan, go to sleep. I kneeled beside him, gently closing his eyes and massaging his temples. Soon, Eden fell asleep. He slept directly until noon. Curiously, I followed him and found that the large garden was lined with cherry blossom trees, pearl white and pink, like clouds and rosy clouds, blooming on the branches, beautiful beyond words. I was captivated, deeply moved. I reached out to catch a falling petal and couldn't help but say to Eden, I have a secret to tell you. Eden turned around. What is it? I bravely said, the young hero who saved me during the high school fight has long been hidden deep in my heart. He smiled brightly, bending down to hold my face with deep emotion. I have a secret to tell you too. What? My heart raced. Do you remember when you gave a love letter you wrote to yourself to your deskmate? I remember. I even felt guilty about it for a long time. That love letter was delivered by me on behalf of someone else. I said, oh, feeling a bit disappointed.